someone told me the other day, it's like therapists think in hour to hour blocks weekly, it's not, obviously not, no fault of their own. It's hard for them to see past, that, because that's how their world has been structured, is to think hour to hour sessions weekly. How am I covering my schedule? So it's a bandwidth thing of, well, where can I carve out time to even address, brand and, website design and blog posts, and how am I, expanding my network this week? That time is barely there in schedules of clinicians. So that's a big piece of it, is just bandwidth and resource time.
All right, welcome to The Boost, conversations with people promoting mental health. And I'm really stoked to be here with Ryan Scanlon, who is the founder of Flourish Your Practice. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Good, Steve. Doing well. A lot of, we're in March now. March is flying by, but yeah, a lot of change, a lot of growth, a lot of good things happening. Feeling good. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, the day we're recording, I'm realizing it's like we're a third of the way through March, which it feels like I just like took down the Christmas lights,
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh no, actually Q1 is basically in the books. So that is amazing. It's a challenge to stay up with the change and the change management in our lives. But I'm glad you're doing good. I'm glad to talk with you. Excited to learn and share with our audience more about your independent consultancy for behavioral health companies, helping folks with their sales and marketing in this realm. This is exactly the type of company that we're out here looking to find and meet. And you and I just met kind of recently, though, which is such a delight to know that there's still awesome resources like you that we're just getting to know.
For sure. No, there's such a spontaneous energy, to the marketing and business development worlds. Always reach out, always make the call, always send the message. Just, you never know, So no, I was super happy and love what you do, follow what you do pretty closely, and, diving really, headfirst into this behavioral health marketing world, and really friendly folks, a lot of helpful people so far, you being obviously at the top of the list. So no, super happy to be on.
Awesome. And normally I would be your wonder twin. I almost always wear like a black V-neck shirt. It's like we're still getting out of like the winter temperatures. So I went with like a fleece, but we would have definitely been like the twinsies. So
Right on.
yeah, we look a little different. That's probably good to keep it straight. Who's who?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into it. Let's do the virtual hug and the shameless plug, which is what you know, but for anybody new. So the virtual hug is tell us somebody or something that you're grateful for today.
Yeah. So I think a few days ago, I saw on LinkedIn one of my old teachers from high school, Michael Blueglass. And I love the story. He is really the reason I got into behavioral health in the first place. He is the definition of that above and beyond teacher that just pulls passion out of students and gets them really to maximize what they have. He taught this course called Science Research, and it was a complete elective. No one had to take it, but he went into classrooms, just kind of pitching kids on this class. And basically what you do is you pick a area of scientific research, and he had all these connections in the area. I grew up in kind of suburban New York City area. So he knew all these different doctors and engineers and people in the science fields. And so students would pick an area, and he would set them up basically with research internships as high school students at like IBM, at like a cancer hospital. Just mind-blowing stuff, really awesome. And so I just gravitated towards his energy. Really dynamic, enthusiastic guy. And I just kind of was driven towards behavioral health. I didn't know that was a thing before. You could study feelings and emotions and thoughts, and that just was so cool to me. And of course, he fed that passion, so beautifully. I learned, all about like the DSM and diagnostics and disorders and all of it. And schizophrenia was really my first area of interest in psychology and mental health, which is, gnarly, a really intense thing. But I love, Mr. Blueglass was such an instrumental person for me. And yeah, just teachers in general are so important. But he's still doing really well. He's doing like STEM consulting. He's, running science fairs in our area still. Like, he's just so influential and so awesome. And I'm sure I'm one of thousands of students who have similar stories of like, yeah, Blue really helped kind of start my passion. So no, this happened a few days ago, and I'm like, I know what I'm going to bring up with Steve when I talk to him.
And you called him Blue?
Yeah, oh yeah, we all called him Blue. Yeah, Mr. Blue Glass, but he was Blue. Yeah.
What an amazing name. That's a fabulous name. And what an impact on you and
Yeah.
probably so many kids. But was there something that he did? Was it like an internship that got you into the behavioral health space?
Yeah. Oh yeah, man. So he said that's the best part. He set me up with an inpatient psychiatrist in an inpatient unit, 20 minutes from my house. And so 2 consecutive summers, I would go down there and I'd work with people with schizophrenia. And I had research, like I kind of had a research thesis I was working on. And I would go there and kind of work with them on daily skills and just kind of play games and kind of hang out and just be there. Again, is how much I could do as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old in an inpatient unit.
Sure.
But that was my first experience, and it was, crazy. It was awesome, and really, in a way, overwhelming, but in the best ways. I just felt myself really being in the deep end of the pool, being like, this is great. Like I want to study this in college. I want to follow where this takes me. So no, yeah, he set me up with a really cool situation. I think it was called the Weill Cornell Medical, Hospital in White Plains, New York. So no, that was incredible experience, 2 summers in a row.
Amazing. Well, that's
Yep.
so cool. What an opportunity for a high schooler to get to do.
Yep.
And that had to have been transformative to your life. And now here you are helping practices. So perfect transition into the shameless plug, which is you're the very best person on the world to talk about the great work you're doing and how it impacts practices and clinicians. So just share about Flourish Your Practice and what you're doing.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, I bring a lot of, since, my high school years, I've worked in so many different behavioral health settings. That's always the passion. If that's not clear already, I've always had such a pull towards this work. But then I've added a business and sales acumen. I worked for, a tech company, a behavioral health tech company for 3 years. And so really Flourish is trying to combine those two worlds. I hear all the time, therapists and clinicians, they never were taught the business practices, the lead generation, those kinds of practices in grad school at all, how to run a private practice. So I come in and I really see myself as a behavioral health, like Swiss Army knife. I obviously can help you build a pipeline, build contacts, marketing, content creation, website, all the very basics of like the sales and marketing stuff. But I really see myself as, if you need business planning help, I've done that with clients. If you need EHR or tech, sort of consultation, I do that as well. I've done a lot of different things in behavioral health, and now I'm really applying it in a consultative fashion with certain offerings. So it's been awesome. I obviously lean into marketing and business development, but I really see myself as a jack of all trades, helping small practices, larger practices to a degree. And the other kind of wrinkle to all of this is that, I blend in kind of the alternative modalities of therapy and treatment, right? We have our traditional psychotherapeutic approaches, but I personally and professionally have dipped into kind of more spiritual modalities, somatic work, EMDR, breath work as well. Psychedelics is obviously a huge growing industry. That's something I'm very passionate about and have been for a long time. So I really see benefit from merging all those worlds together. And that's kind of my greater vision, is that if I can help private practices and also psychedelic facilitators and everybody in between kind of work with each other and use each other as referral sources and support and kind of merge all those worlds, I think it's going to lift everybody up. So that's really the greater vision. Yep.
That's great. Wow, you are the Swiss Army knife of practices, being able to range from electronic medical records to like helping maybe clinicians infuse different modalities or different ways of practicing, or simply helping those maybe newer, or I don't know the right term, even fringe, we're still getting comfortable with the concept of this move towards spirituality, which I feel like is the case. People could disagree for sure, but I agree with that. But let's start all the way back. So talk about you started with sales and marketing. Talk about sort of the impact that you're having there. Like what are the common pain points and problems since these professionals don't get this kind of education in their formal training? What do you see walking into a practice, which are some of the maybe the blocking and tackling that you have to solve for first?
Yeah, totally. I think number one is there's so many things. I think number one is bandwidth. I think let's start there, right? There's so much that they take on just emotionally. We all know that. Someone told me the other day, it's like therapists think in hour to hour blocks weekly, it's not obviously not no fault of their own. It's hard for them to see past, that because that's how their world has been structured, is to think hour to hour sessions weekly. How am I covering my schedule? So it's a bandwidth thing of, well, where can I carve out time to even address, brand and, website design and blog posts, and how am I, expanding my network this week? That time is barely there in schedules of clinicians. So that's a big piece of it, is just bandwidth and resource time. The other piece I would say is, I think it's getting comfortable with the fact that this is a business as well. Obviously, I think most clinicians are extremely altruistic, right? They want to help people. That's why most people get into the field. No, I'll say this: nobody gets into the field to make money. It's such a adverse thing. It's, I was like that too. I never saw, the true calling of mental health and helping people as this monetary thing. I was, if anything, against that. I think most clinicians will probably always say that they want to help people first, and making money is always secondary, or if not further down the list. But it's getting clinicians comfortable with, you're doing great work, and it's okay to monetize and dip into these business practices. And I think a lot of it comes natural to a lot of clinicians in private practices. What I've seen is, like, think about a private practice therapist. They're an entrepreneur. They are a self-starter. They like to learn. They grow all the time. They like expanding their networks. They are autonomous. They have so many skills already, I think, that an entrepreneur has. It's just about, I think, activating and making them more comfortable with, hey, this is kind of how you help, obviously, SEO. This is how a website should be formatted and structured. Here's how I can come in and take the burden off your plate, for expanding your network, getting you 50, maybe 100 new contacts in a couple of weeks or so. I can do email campaigns to take that off your plate. So I say it's a bandwidth thing for sure. And then I think a lot of them naturally have this. Again, think about, therapists and practitioners. They're always excellent communicators. They understand the importance of storytelling and contextualizing and sort of their brand and their theme. Again, a lot of these websites are gorgeous and they have really great imagery and they tell a really awesome, unique story about the provider themselves. But I just try to come in and sort of format it in a different way, get them to think about it a different way, and really teach them the skills so they can sustain it for themselves in the future, right? I always want to teach people how to fish, right? Because then they feed themselves for a lifetime. So those are the main two things I try to do, and what I see when I first come in.
Mm-hmm. Bandwidth.
Yeah.
Is clutch, and then sort of the altruistic nature of the work and the association that, because it's altruistic, it means it should maybe not be capitalistic, or
right.
And
right.
certainly we don't want to take advantage of people, in difficult
Yep.
situations. Like there's an ethics there component, but do you so that's interesting about the hourly blocks, the weekly blocks, and there's something nice about the reliability and consistency of that, but that's probably starting to get pretty disrupted, I would guess, in terms of maybe younger generations kind of coming up through the ranks, hitting that age. We've had this bottleneck of people 35 to 55, which is like the perfect age for a clinician. That's the least amount of people we have in terms of the population pyramid.
Right.
So for that small population to service, the baby boomers and then Gen Z and beyond, it's a heavy lift just from a body's standpoint. So then my guess would be, younger people especially are frustrated with access, and then those younger people's parents are frustrated with access. So do you see clinicians in that traditional, this hour is how I think and how I work, are they starting to disrupt that, or is it still pretty like I'm rambling a little bit here, but you know where I'm getting at. Like,
Yeah.
is it still pretty much the de facto format for doing business as a talk therapist?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's so many thoughts, but like what I'll say is I think for the most part, it's still pretty de facto. It's still just the unnecessary. If you're going to go the traditional contract with insurance, commercial plans, reimbursement, just traditional route, like it's still very much set for you in that way. Again, where I will go and I'll work with a lot of clients who do a lot of out of pocket stuff, who do group stuff, who do, of course, like these larger things like retreats and facilitations. And so there's a world, again, the world I sort of service to gets outside that weekly block structure a little bit more. But of course, if you get more towards traditional behavioral health, it's still pretty much there. But I want to bounce off something you said too about kind of this bottleneck, and that's something that struck me years ago, to understand like how many master's level clinicians we have in this country compared to just the population, because my approach always has been like, if you talk about like a TAM, right, a TAM, a total addressable market for anything, right, behavioral health, it's everybody, like if you have a brain and you have thoughts and emotions, like the entire population is a market for this. And so then when you really think about it like that, and again, it's everyone can benefit from therapy. I'm totally a person where it's like there shouldn't have to be anything wrong. Again, it goes back to this, the healthcare structure of something has to be wrong, something has to be sick or diagnosed in order to justify treatment, which is fair, I guess, in the traditional medical sense. But I am so much of the thought that mental health care and healing can happen just because we're human. It doesn't have to involve a trauma or this large, sort of something wrong and this large diagnostic. Of course, those things happen, and that, of course, requires treatment. But I really see the whole population, everybody with a brain and feelings, can benefit from therapy. And so I guess when you look at it like that, and then you have, again, the small amount of therapists we have, the master's level clinicians we have, that's even more of a bottleneck. So I've always thought, I would love to hear your thoughts on what you're hearing, but like, we have to expand the different roles and capacities and definitions of what a mental health professional is. I think to ask more people to go into master's programs and pay and go to school, all of that, and then to get paid at a pretty, modest ceiling once they're out of grad school. And it's not a super financially sustainable model if we're going to expect all these clinicians every year. I think we need to expand it to what are, counselor support certifications, right? What are other ways we can get people into the mental health professional ecosystem without having them have to go through master's programs and things like that? I've had a lot of thoughts and conversations just around how we expand that pool of mental health professionals. Because again, I think the less and less stigma kind of melts away, the more, people that are going to seek therapy or some sort of it doesn't have to be therapy, it can be mental health support in some capacity. We need to expand the professional pool of individuals in the field. And, it can't just be have to go to grad school, have to do this and that, and, get credentialed and all that, which again is valid and you need that in the field. But yeah, for a lot of other people that may not need traditional therapy, how are we feeding that workforce with behavioral health professionals? I'd be very passionate about something that can get more people into the field to help, because there's such a bottleneck, man. You're right.
Mm-hmm. Man, we just hit that point in the conversation where we're off to the races. We were talking about ahead of time, and you made a bunch of great points in there. I'm going to try to respond where I can, which is I would start by saying, speaking from experience, my own experience, working with an LPC was tremendously valuable for me in that traditional setting, and continues to be. But like, I really started to see things that I was blind to. And that took, for me, a professional. And, I think it's certainly a great hypothesis that mental health care and training could benefit everybody with a brain. The type of care that takes is up for debate for me. We're still getting better about where are the outcomes, where are the measurable quality clinical outcomes in a reliable way. But I've been in healthcare long enough to see that we are also potentially making the same healthcare mistake that we did with our bodies, which is I defer to the doctor and their
Right.
expertise
Sure.
as this collective assumption that the doctors should make us well.
Right.
And there's a lot of nuance here. So I apologize if I don't capture it all, because just like with the mind, which is way more complex than the body,
Right.
there will always be complexities. Like life is a
Right.
big, complex wheel that we spin, and sometimes it lands on child cancer and we don't know why. We may never know why. And that is like an incredibly sad thing. The wheel is also very big, and for lots of people, the very best thing we can do is what I term agency, which is owning our own stuff as much as possible. And sometimes that does take a specialist or a primary care physician or a talk therapist to say, hey, I really can see a path forward for you. And you may not have this training or this work tree down knowledge of how to deal with what you're dealing with. But for the most part, we're taxing ourselves tremendously with just the things we do. And how can we move toward, like what you're saying, move toward alternative care groups like peer support?
Yep.
Maybe
Of course.
it's a non-professional peer support group, which I think most people would think in their heads, okay, well, Alcoholics Anonymous might be that. Well,
Yeah.
what if we take that and apply that model to, all sorts of ways that we can combat loneliness while helping each other? Like that
Right.
is a high goal, but it doesn't make a lot of money. It makes
Yeah.
even less money than
Right.
therapy.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. No, you hit it on the head. I think I've always admired, I worked in an SUD residential program for boys. And yeah, we take AA meetings all the time. And it just struck me just, how human it is, how direct it is. They're speaking from firsthand experience. And so, I think that model has so much merit to it, that peer model. And I've been to, there's conferences. I think Colorado does a great job with their peer support system. I, went to presentations on it, and, it's like with anything new, and this, it's like, it takes just time. It takes time to iron out the kinks. So if there's anything new that this industry or any industry is going to implement, there's going to be bumps. There's going to be, okay, we need a probation period of 6 months, see how this goes. Okay, how are people responding? Maybe a year or two, right? And so, and again, like certain states, like as we know in this country, certain states will kind of, try certain things out, and we'll kind of learn from them. And then maybe other states will take it on after that. But not many. Hit on the head. I think the AA model, there's so much merit in that peer model, can definitely be applied to behavioral health and to other settings for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think when I think about my own health, I think about the things I reduce that improve my health. And then it is stumbling on the right systems for me, getting my body into a state of ketosis seems to be for me a very net positive thing. It's one giant experiment, so I'll never know, there's not 1,000 Steve Turneys to try this on. But it seems to work for me. And then it is, just kind of fractional exercise that improves, me marginally and gives me outputs for the inputs, so it's kind of like lazy exercise and the reduction of things that seem to be harmful to me over time. And how can we do more of that for ourselves? I don't know. I'll leave that there, but I do want to open another door, which you opened earlier, which is the psychedelics front. Speaking of different states, taking on different legislation and different approaches to things. What's your sort of state of the union, or what is your research on psychedelics, and where are you just kind of at in that topic?
Yeah, man, certainly. I appreciate going here. So what I'll start, ketamine was really kind of what you'd call the first FDA approved psychedelic treatment. I couldn't tell you, which states, if any, I couldn't tell you the state by state of kind of where that's at, but we know ketamine is used in certain treatment settings. Also, they have the nasal spray. And so, but again, ketamine has been used in medical capacities. So again, I think there's just more familiarity from a medical standpoint with how that chemical responds. And so that makes total sense to me why that that FDA really had, that was the first one to kind of make it through, now the other ones, there's so much there. I'll start with psilocybin, which is, obviously the chemical compound in mushrooms. So we know Oregon was kind of passed. They decriminalized it, but they've also implemented this really innovative infrastructure in the state, and they call it the Oregon Psilocybin Services. It's kind of a separate department within the public health department of Oregon. So they're putting a lot of money and resources at the state level into making sure everybody's licensed, everybody's doing it the right way. The whole supply chain, the manufacturers, the distributors, the facilitators, really top to bottom, a really great, kind of system right now. So I've talked to a bunch of facilitators up there and kind of felt out the pain points a little bit. Again, it's like with anything new, there's a lot of trial and error. I'll say this too, the financial investment for a facilitator to open a practice is massive. It's just hard. If you want to, I hear it's to open a center for psilocybin, facilitation services. I've heard $10,000 is like the entry fee to even start. And I hear you have to kind of pay that every year annually to the state to stay open. So the financial barriers up there for that kind of treatment as a professional is very high. And so what individuals do is they contract with centers, right? So you have one person who maybe opens the center, has money, has investment sources, and then they contract a bunch of, psilocybin facilitators. The facilitators now, they can work with a bunch of different centers. It's not exclusive. They're, contract employees. It's still very new, and there's a lot there. And I think so I'll also just pause and say Colorado, I believe, has the same legal legislation in that it's decriminalized. Now, they don't have the same level of infrastructure around these services. They're getting there, I think. I'm not actually, not sure where they are, but they're in the same legal position as Oregon, but they're not in the same, facilitation place that Oregon is around services. And it's been great. Again, the people I talked to in Oregon, it's, people from all over the country who have been afraid to kind of break the rules, around psychedelics, but they have heard the potential of it. They've heard really what it unlocks in you. And so a lot of people have traveled there to do these services. And I guess there's so much more, and then the other thing I'll pivot to that's close to my heart is MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. So that's how I originally got interested, in the psychedelic world. This was during undergrad for me. So, over 10 years ago, I did research. Again, this is, 2013, 2014, research with a research partner. And we never obviously tested with MDMA, but basically what we did was, as college students, we asked people, hey, does your knowledge of MDMA as a chemical, does that impact your receptivity to potentially doing this treatment for yourself or for a loved one? We wanted to see that. We wanted to see if knowledge of a chemical or a substance has any impact on if you would do the treatment or not. And then we also threw in like a risk propensity scale as well. If you're a higher risk tolerant, would that impact your ability to pursue the service? So in sum, it didn't matter how much you knew about MDMA or not. People scored high, low on the MDMA knowledge scale. It didn't matter. It didn't have any impact on whether they would do the service or not, which was very interesting to me, which I think is just going back to no matter how much maybe evidence we may provide to somebody or knowledge we might have on a subject, something like that when it comes to our bodies is like very personal. It's very instinctual. It's very gut. And they just have a feeling about it or they don't, if they want to do it. But the risk tolerance scale, that was shown to correlate positively with receptivity to take the treatment. So naturally, people who are a little more risk tolerant, find themselves being more open to this kind of stuff. So and then MDMA. So that's still, I think they just had a big thing move towards FDA approval. Like they had their application to the FDA recently, which is huge. So I mean, that I'll say MDMA, I think what I'll say is the biggest like addressable issue within the psychedelic community, I think, has been MDMA to PTSD. That's what I see all the time. Psilocybin's been used in a bunch of situations, LSD, all these things, but I just see over and over MDMA and PTSD. There's such a beautiful unlock there, and it's been shown over and over. Veterans, people with complex trauma, sexual assault, abuse trauma, all that kind of stuff. MDMA really helps unlock and heal and soften the processing of that stuff. So that's, yeah, there's so much there, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention, that was how I was introduced to the field of psychedelics. It was this MDMA PTSD connection, and it's continued to grow. And you see all walks of life. Again, you see veterans, you see these extremely, hardened, war veterans, but MDMA really just allows them to just go to these places and forgive, and heal themselves. And it's so wonderful. And it's going to take time, but when you see it up close, it's like, how, we're getting here. This is the right track,
That's incredible. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I've talked with a number of people. I booked a really great speaker last year for my conference, Matt Zeman. He wrote a book, Psychedelics for Everyone, which is quite the title. But he's so well versed in it, and a lot more than I do about it. But I have talked with somebody recently, and all I can say is that he said, going through an unplanned separation, psychedelics were incredibly valuable for him. And, a number of stories with other people in similar reactions to, this is the thing that let me unlock and heal and forgive. And that's when it gets rich, and that's when it gets deep into the spirituality and what practices and why do some old stories and traditions and values, last and live on. And here we are talking about the next frontier in mental health is forgiveness,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
What? That's fascinating to me. It's like, it's maybe it's as simple as some of that, and then on the other side of that, incredibly complex, we don't have all the answers. We don't have nearly all the answers, but there are some things like that when we get really down to it and we look at it, for many of us, or most of us, there's a lot that we can do simply for ourselves, I think.
There's so much there. Just I've thought about this a lot, just the idea of intentionality. And psychedelics require you to really examine your intentionality around what you're doing day to day, what your relationships are like, how you're spending your time. And of course, while you're in an experience, it just makes you realize, wait, why am I here? Why am I in this experience right now? No, we talk about a loneliness crisis, and I completely, there's no refuting the fact that connection and forgiveness for the self and, all that stuff is really critical, and kind of in this really not dangerous is a strong word, but you know what I mean? It's in a very sensitive place right now. But for me, intentionality, I think, is really the foundation of all of that, because you can have connection, you can have people around you. You see people that have, families and have friends and have jobs, and on the surface, everything looks cool and like they should, quote unquote, should be good. But the intention is really important, because if someone isn't really engaged and plugged in and understanding, what am I getting out of this relationship? How can I really show up, or not just how can I show up, but like, how am I showing up? Like, just, myself, like checking in with yourself, understanding, how am I showing up to this relationship? How am I showing up to my job today? All that stuff really, I think, brings us to a better place where we are, not just alleviating loneliness, but just having more inner acceptance. And I think without the intention behind why we're doing these things, the loneliness and the disconnected will still be happening. So I always I've been thinking a lot about just intentionality, what it really means, what it really, the why behind why I'm doing things, whether it's good practice, healthy, I shouldn't say good or bad, healthier practices, more, frivolous practices, all of that can be intentional, and that's fine. Just make sure you're not distracting yourself. Make sure you're not disengaging. Everything you do can be a very engaged, intentional, conscious thing. And that's what I think brings about connection. That's what I think really is the X factor for helping loneliness. So I've just been chewing on that for a little bit. I don't know if that resonates. But intentionality, I think, is just an underused muscle, like in our society. A lot of us don't really notice that day to day. But I think when you do, it's like, oh, I could get so much out of today if I really notice my intentionality here behind all these daily things,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would add to that a comment about asking ourselves, which is something I took from some Jungian thought or some Carl Jung book. But basically the idea of, sort of this internal unconscious, this global unconscious, and our unconsciousness within us, and our, it's like, what's the word, soul, or, ourselves, whatever that is, without getting too philosophical about it. But the idea that we can ask ourselves for what we want, and we can listen to the response, and
Yep.
it's almost like without energy, or without effort, rather,
Yep.
that there is something or someone inside that is, ready to communicate,
Yep.
via, maybe it is somatically, or, with meditation, or what our head is telling us, or our heart, or our gut, like you said,
Yep.
as if we can't underestimate how much the gut knows, like
Yep.
the body
Yep.
keeps the score. It all keeps the score, and it all
Yep.
has deep weavings and tapestry into it. So
Right.
I would just close this thought by saying, the consciousness and the unconsciousness that we're
Yep.
maybe largely overlooking sometimes in our lives, or in my life, I can speak to myself, and getting back to that practice is probably something I should do more of. Actually, while we're talking, I'm like, oh man, those moments in my life were so tremendously eye-opening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've just would understand. I mean, to me, I was always been like a very cerebral person. Again, going into mental health, I'm like, the brain is everything, right? If you can master your brain, you can control everything you want. I was very like that for a long time. But then you sort of realize, no. I think there's mental health and brain health. There's body health, obviously. And again, spiritual health, I think, is this its own entity. And it's so hard to define, because if you think about it, like our brains are trying to define it, it's, in real time, but we can't. It's very unspoken. It's very below the surface. But again, we know it when we feel it. It's moments of euphoria and gratitude and contentment. It could be in small little moments, like a movie might move you in one moment, or you're just doing the dishes and the sun just comes in a certain way. You're like, hey, like I wouldn't want to be anywhere else right now. So spiritual health and our spirit, the voice that you're referring to, I call myself this is my spirit. I have unlocked it. I kind of feel like I have given it a voice now in my life. But yeah, I would encourage everyone to, and then of course, how I always try to, formulate it is like, they're separate, but it's like a Venn diagram. They all cross over, there's like that perfect middle of like three little bubbles in a Venn diagram. There's that perfect center where it's like mind, body, spirit converge, and you feel those moments, right? Whether it's, a big moment in your life or something, right? But they all have their own little spaces, but they also converge and meet together in certain ways as well. But yeah, activation of the spirit, really holding space for spiritual health and your spiritual being. And it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be logical. That's what I always I thought everything had to be logical and everything had to be the psychological explanation to it. But the more you just kind of meditate and you go through it and you let yourself feel and you let yourself kind of be what you are. It's so irrational, but it's perfect. And it is, it just is. There's no reason why. So it's very hard to talk about because it's hard to kind of pin down.
Yeah.
But again, I think when you feel it.
Yeah, there's no words for it. And actually the no words part is part of it. There's a book I read about fear written by a neurosurgeon. I forget the name of it. I'll have to come up with it. But I think I got this picture from him, which is like imagine yourself, in sort of an elevated, out of body, transcendent space, which could be considered the spirit, watching Einstein ride a wild Mustang down the beach. He's like, that's like the Venn diagram, of like body, mind, spirit for him, and I always get a laugh out of that because I'm like, what a picture, and what a beautiful picture, right? Because it's not all head and it's not all gut, and we have this spirit component of, if we can watch ourselves in that state, that's a huge step. Most of us are just living first person Einstein vision. We're like, why is life like this? Why is life racing by, and why do I do the things I do? It's like, well, there's maybe more levels or layers, perhaps.
Yeah. And to bring it all back to just what we do, again, I talking to a psilocybin facilitator a couple weeks ago, and she's like, I love when someone comes into, a retreat or one of my, offerings and services sessions, and they've done the psychological work, right? Like they've been in therapy and they know how to navigate. So all these things not just work together in tandem in ourselves, but I see them working together in the greater ecosystem of our industry. And so, I think it's all very siloed off in the external world. It's also very siloed off maybe inside of us. But I think there's so much benefit to having it be holistic, comprehensive, having traditional psychotherapists, but also having your mental work with the spiritual practitioner, but also your spirit. It's so many parallels, I think, to, us, how we work internally, but also how our society works. There's so much unlock to, have all of those different, energies sort of blend and help each other out. Again, like think about traditional psychotherapist. If there's deep trauma work, right? It's like there's somatic therapy, obviously psychedelic therapy. There's different EMDR is a great version as well. It's a team approach, not just a team of individuals, but a team of modalities and energies that really help someone kind of heal and move on. So that's what I've seen. That's what I've seen. Again, I'm still learning. We're always growing and learning how the industry evolves, but I think that's where I think the future is.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for sharing that perspective. I would just keep talking with you. We're going to wrap this up. I've got more to say, but I'm like, this is a great spot to leave it. I think how you wrapped it up, encapsulated it really nicely. Maybe one last question, and then tell us how to find you. But like, what's something you're reading or listening to, that you want to share? It could be a record, or it could be a podcast, or a book, or just a poem, or whatever. But what comes to mind?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. So that's a great question.
This is such a selfish question too, because I
not at all.
Google it.
Not at all. No. So do you know who Rick Rubin is?
Oh, yeah.
He's a music. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So he just came out with a book late last year. I think it was called the Art of Creative Being, or the Creative Art of Being. I'm not sure. I'm botching it, but I think I'm 120 pages in. But if you ever, I love him just because I listen to him, and he has this totally Zen Santa Claus aesthetic. And he's just so wise, and he's worked with all these, wonderful musicians as a producer, and talk about unlock. He just knows how to really get an artist to feel safe to express their true, what they really want to create. And so I just love him. I'm not, a musician, right? But I just so respect and appreciate his approach. And obviously, transcendental meditation is a big part of his life. And I listen to interviews, and his voice is so calming. So I was literally in Target, like a month ago, and I just, Rick Rubin has this new book out. I'm like, I need that. So I've been, 120 pages in. It's really, in the way he formats the book, it's like they're very short chapters. They're not even chapters, like a page and a half of just thoughts. It's just a very easy read. You feel like you're kind of going through a lot because you're just flipping pages because they're kind of short, which I think might be intentional, right? It's the practice of it. But no, it's such a wonderful book. It's just kind of thoughts and meditations on creativity, unlocking what's there, allowing and kind of feeling safe to do so. Wonderful. So I would recommend the new Rick Rubin book that came out last year.
Yeah, that's a good one. And actually, I had to Google it. It's so funny you said that about the title, because every time I try to say that title, I can't ever get it right in my head, but it's The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And I always get most of those words in.
Yeah. Close, so close.
Yeah, but like, yeah, his voice on the Audible version, it is just, I'll go to sleep to it sometimes. I'll just put it in to fall asleep. And like, he has these different various kind of like cones and, you know, like these bells ringing, not bells, but like, I don't know, this like percussion that happens, this like gentle, calming percussion. And so, yeah, I love that book too. I've started it a number of times. I don't know if I've ever gotten all the way through it, but it's not the kind of book that you even have to like read start to finish.
Says that in the beginning. He's like, don't worry about finishing it. Like, pick it up wherever you want to pick it up, which I love. Like, you know, I love it. Yep.
Yeah. It's partly what's inspired me to start a new podcast called Turning Creative, which is like,
great.
Yeah, legit. Like moving off of what I call the competitive path onto the creative path, where you create things of value for other people instead of kind of forcing my way down this path where I had to win, you know, and at what cost. So I'll have to have you on that one too. That'll be fun.
Yeah, right on. Cool.
Well, how can people find you? Tell us about the socials and the websites and the emails and things.
Yeah, absolutely. So the website is flourishyourpractice.com. And yeah, LinkedIn. I'm a big LinkedIn guy. It's how I got in contact with Steve. But no, I post on LinkedIn pretty frequently, follow it pretty closely. But yeah, LinkedIn, Ryan Scanlon, MBA. And flourishyourpractice.com is the website.
Awesome. We'll put those links in there. And Ryan, thanks for being on the show. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Awesome. Steve, yeah, thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right.